especially in Victoria, would have to say that we're in the impact phase. We're certainly not in the pre-impact phase, and we're certainly not in the recovery phase. So we're still living it. And that's why we're shut into our homes at the moment, because it's happening.
I'm Dani Valent, and this is Dirty Linen, the podcast that takes the issues the hospitality industry finds hard to air in public and shakes them all about. Dr. Paul Valent is a psychiatrist, a trauma specialist, and an expert in disasters and how they affect people. He also happens to be my dad. I thought it would be great to chat to him for Mental Health Week on Dirty Linen. Dad, Dr. Valent, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Dani. Nice to be with you.
Good to be with you. Last time I spoke to you, we were celebrating a Carlton win, so a bit of a different mode today.
Very different, yes. No euphoria this time.
Yeah, true. So the reason I wanted to chat to you is because I know that, throughout my life you've been concerned with how people cope with personal trauma or large-scale disasters of any type, how they can process what's happened to them and how they can get through it and thrive in the future. I guess you're not a hospitality isn't a particular focus of yours, not that you mind eating in good restaurants. But I know that you've got a lot of expertise in the human condition and how we deal with things. So I just wanted to get your views on the pandemic and how you think that people might be dealing with it.
Well, Dani, with respect to your introduction, when you were a somewhat smaller, a little girl, you might remember that there were the Ash Wednesday bushfires, and I was away from home quite a lot. The Ash Wednesday bushfires taught me a lot about how people respond in disasters. And when you ask about how to conceptualize this pandemic, well, it is a disaster. And it's certainly not a disaster like the bushfires, which, by the way, we suffered just before the pandemic. But they do have a lot in common underlying them. I mean, each disaster is quite different, like the bushfires and the pandemic are very different, but they have underlying features. And one of the ways that I think about this disaster and other disasters as well is, first of all, the format, the features, and then the content. So like the features, every disaster will have a beginning, a middle, and end. We call them different phases of disaster, like pre-impact, impact, post-impact, recovery. And then there are other parameters, like are we dealing with an individual, a family, a community, maybe in your case, a particular profession, in a particular place. So in other words, you define the parameters in order to be able to orientate. Where are you? Who are you? What is the timing of this? And then come the content. And I think in terms of two types of content, one is the mind and the other is the heart. So with regard to the mind, what are you doing? How are you assessing this? Are you clear what the stress is, what you have to do? Or are you confused? Or are you paralyzed? So that is the mind. And then the heart, are you anxious? Are you sad? What are the emotions that you're feeling? Longing, guilt, shame, anger, feeling let down, hopeful, and all that sort of thing. So these are the ways of thinking and orientating around a very stressful or traumatic situation.
So what are some of the things that people might feel during a disaster?
Well, what they might feel will depend on what it is that they are motivated to do at that time. So, for instance, you might want to rescue someone, and if you can't rescue them, then you might feel a tremendous guilt. Or you might feel that I'm lucky, somebody else is suffering and I'm not, and then you might suffer survivor guilt. You might feel helpless because there's nothing you can do at that particular time. Or you might feel angry depending on wanting others to do something for you that they are not doing. Or you want something clarified and it's not being clarified. You might feel sad, because you've lost something. You're totally aggrieved. You might feel terrified of where the next meal is coming from, or if you know where this meal is coming from, but what about the meal in 2 weeks' time? So a lot of the feelings and the motivations that come from them depend on a particular situation and how you perceive that situation.
I think, as you went through that list, I imagine that people listening to it would feel a lot of comfort in having some of their feelings recognized, because I think, survivor guilt, I think, is one thing. I was just talking to someone earlier today and I said, "How are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, I'm fine." But if it sounds weird, but I actually feel bad about being fine. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to talk to Dad about that, because that's something that you would understand. There are feelings that you have that you almost you have the feeling, and that's one thing that's difficult to deal with, but then you feel bad about having the feeling. So I think to have those feelings and responses named is a really important part of the process, isn't it?
I think it is extremely important, and just with regard to what you said, it's quite amazing, really, because the first contact that we had with people in the Ash Wednesday bushfires was in a pub, and I just asked this group of men who were just there, and I said, well, I didn't know what to ask, but so I just asked my usual question: of all the things that worry you, what worries you the most? And they looked blank, and then they said, because my house is standing. And I said, what? Your house is standing? Yeah. I feel terrible about that. I thought they were crazy. I said, why do you feel so terrible about that? I said, well, because my neighbours has been burnt down, and they've worked for 3 years on that house, and just after they finished, it burnt. And here is my old house, and it's standing, and it's intolerable. So, yeah. And as you said, once it's identified and you understand why, there is a reason why you feel guilty. The survivor guilt isn't there for nothing. And it is because in most situations, actually, if you're better off than your neighbour, this guilt will motivate you to help your neighbour. If you can't help them, the feeling stays and you don't know what to do with it. But in sort of, let's say, everyday disaster situations, that guilt will motivate you to actually help someone. And it's really good for the community, because the community survives through these emotions. So most people survive through these emotions that people have. We can call them survivor instincts, if you like, and some of them relate to the welfare of the community, not just to one's own welfare.
That's really amazing. So you're saying that there's actually a point to those feelings. It's part of the human design, or part of society's design.
Well, it's evolutionary design. We actually share. We think we share a lot of the emotions with other mammals, because we see them reacting similarly in disasters. I think guilt and shame are probably more human they are more human than animal feelings. But yeah, they are part of that spectrum, And all these emotions that people feel actually have a purpose. And I think that's really important to understand. And even if they are feelings of helplessness, and see, when other people see somebody helpless, their natural instinct will be to rescue them and help them. So even the helpless feelings have a survival value.
I guess that it's different though if someone is helpless but nobody knows that they're helpless.
Yes, well, these feelings don't always work. The motivations sometimes come up against brick walls, or they cry out in the wilderness. They are useful statistically useful, if you like. Most of the time they are useful, or they have helped people to survive. But now you're often, well, not only that, first of all, you're often left with the unsatisfied emotion. And actually, you're always left with some unsatisfied emotion, because you can't satisfy every emotion in a disaster. I mean, that's the definition of a disaster, that bad things happen, and your emotions are not sufficient to deal with them. That's the difference between stress and trauma. In stress, you can still rectify whatever is going on that is going in the wrong direction. But in trauma, the wrong has already happened, and it's difficult to then, you can't rectify it, you can mitigate it, you can still do things that are very, very important and save lives, but something bad has already happened.
So do you think that the pandemic is a disaster for us in Australia? Or do you think it's different for different people?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, for people who have died in their families, well, you can't rectify that. We don't know. We're still in some of the initial stages. You would know better than me. I mean, with your clients or with the people that you see, for some, their businesses are already ruined, and maybe irretrievably so. I mean, if people are over a certain age, it's very difficult for them to start again. For others, it's a stress that they will overcome. And they'll look back and say, oh, it was stressful at the time, but we managed, and here we have a thriving restaurant. So, yeah, you're right. It is different for different people. And how it will pan out, well, we still don't know.
You mentioned at the start of the conversation this thing about, the phases of a disaster. I think one of the things that is so difficult with the coronavirus pandemic is that we don't know when it's going to end. We don't have this sense of, are we in the middle? Are we towards the end? Is this just the beginning? I think that, when you don't have a sense of the timeline, it's so difficult to know how to fit yourself in it.
Yeah, I think especially in Victoria, would have to say that we're in the impact phase. We're certainly not in the pre-impact phase, and we're certainly not in the recovery phase. So we're still living it. I mean, that's why we're shut into our homes at the moment, because it's happening.
Something that I notice a lot in the hospitality world is that people who are used to being very busy, very active, and very engaged they're really lost because they're not able to do their jobs, or at least not in the same way as they were before. They're just not as busy, and I think it's often they're missing that sense of purpose. What do you think that's? Do you think that is a reasonable thing, or can you understand that people would feel like that during this time? And is there anything that they can do to help themselves?
Well, I think it's totally understandable. I mean, so much of one's identity and, as you say, meaning and purpose are involved in what you're doing. And hospitality people, look, I imagine when they're working, they're really working hard and intensely, and they rush around, and they have a lot of things to think about. another aspect of it is that they are creative, and then they get their rewards. So it's not only the activity, but also the meaning of it, the creativity and the reward of it is missing. What you can do, that's a difficult one. I think one of the things is to not try. Well, it's good to be active. If you can't be active in one area, maybe you can still be active in another. For instance, in creating something in the home, you can still cook at home. You have to nevertheless maintain a certain flexibility and adapt and try new things. You know, you might try or think up new recipes or something that might be useful later. If you can keep a sense of humour, that's good. In the bushfires, people said, yeah, my sausage is burnt. It's quite a barbecue here. You know, that sort of thing. It just gives you a kind of distance to be looking at yourself rather than totally experiencing things all the time. And yeah, you can manage your worries and ruminations and say, I'm only going to listen to the news in the morning and the evening, and in between I'll do something else.
Limiting exposure to it,
yeah. Otherwise you can be totally immersed in it all the time and you don't have any distance from it, and you can't even think about it properly. So it's important to know, ultimately it is important to know the truth, the facts of the situation, and you can only take in that many facts at a time. So you have to ration yourself with facts. And make sure, by the way, that you rely on reliable facts, not on rumours, not what your mate is saying or what the next door fellow is saying and so on. There are always compensations, there are always silver linings. There might be somebody who's worse off than you and maybe you can help them. You might have people whom you love, whom you can communicate with. Don't be afraid of asking for help from people. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel inferior. Don't feel that that this is somehow or other your fault or it shows up your basic personality. You can be a role model for others. And also you can cry. You can bang your fist on the desk. You can express your emotion, because as you do it, you can become aware of what you feel and you don't bottle it up and it doesn't fester inside.
What about the personal relationships? I mean, a lot of people are spending more time with their, the people they live with, whether it's family, loved ones, friends, housemates. A lot of people are spending more time together than they're used to. And perhaps, we're all a little bit frayed when we engage with other people. It's not as it is normally. What are some of the things that we should look out for in our interpersonal engagements?
Yeah, well, when you say frayed, there's been about 15 to 30% increase in domestic violence. It depends. It depends on the situations. Some relationships have improved. Sometimes a person who's been busy at work all the time suddenly finds out that he's got children and they're lovable and they want to love him or her. So it can be good. You can have communications with your partners or relatives that you haven't had before. Still, frayed situations do bring out frayed emotions, whatever they are. I think communication is very important so that you know what the other person is feeling and that they know what you're feeling. there's that saying, we can have breakfast and dinner together, but not for lunch. So a certain degree of separateness, even within a particular domicile, is very useful.
It's so funny you say that, because I am so sick of providing lunch for people in my household. I can handle breakfast and dinner, but when I learned we were going back into lockdown, one of the things that crossed my mind was, oh no, people are going to ask me what's for lunch. I can't stand that.
Well, yeah, so there you go. So you can say, listen, I also need nurturing and nourishment. How about having a roster? Yeah, just because I'm a chef doesn't mean, or in your case, a food writer who, but nevertheless is a cook as well. Yeah, you can say, well, I have needs too. And people will actually respond well to that, because if you don't speak up, people don't know what you feel.
Yeah.
You just might get cranky, and and they don't know why.
Oh, Dad, you couldn't possibly imagine that happening, could you? me being cranky.
You'd be cranky. Oh, no. You'd be. I won't say all the things you've done.
So, Dad, you've got something happened to you early in life that I think prompted you along this path of understanding human behaviour and how people tick. So, do you want to share that with the Dirty Linen audience?
Well, I don't mind. Well, I'm a survivor of the Holocaust, so obviously I was a child at the time. I was in a particular situation which was hiding. I was hiding in a flat with my parents, and there was obviously constant danger, and the danger for quite a while wasn't bombs, although they came later in the piece, but it was being discovered to be Jewish. Now, a lot of the time, it was like a dream. So, in other words, it was a bit like now. I was locked down, if you like, and it was in a flat and seemingly normal situation, and yet it was totally abnormal. So instead of viruses, there were police and Secret Service agents and people who were willing to denounce you and so on. So the air was full of, if you like, viruses, but I clung to this home situation, and in a funny way, the less I thought and the less I knew, the better it was, and I was in a sort of cocoon. And Dani, I actually wrote an article for the Jewish News comparing the current situation with the past situation. And there are similarities, and I pointed them out in the article. And a lot of people actually responded and said, thanks for this article, because we actually went into a panic as if we were back in our childhood. But it was really good for you to actually point out, which I did, that today is quite different. It is very different, and nobody's actually trying to kill you. People are combining together to help each other. There is no, there's no major tragedy at the end of this. There's going to be survival at the end of this for most people, as against most people at the time were killed. So, yeah, if there's anything that I'm suggesting to your audience at the moment, is to be truthful, to know the facts, but to not diminish their meaning or what they mean, but also to not exaggerate them. It's very easy to exaggerate and to have the worst outcome in your mind, and it's unlikely that that worst outcome will happen. So not to negate, that we are in a pandemic and people will die, but still the chances are of survival and of things later returning to normal. And we will have learned things, hopefully, and some things will be better.
What are some of the opportunities to learn from this? What kinds of things can you see us learning or learning to value more?
Well, I don't want to be, a Pollyanna, and things might actually turn out worse because there are often cascades of stresses and traumas. However, have a look at our government. Instead of sniping at each other, they've come together and they've realised what is important, what is the most important thing. And they got together on that. And if they carry this over, this comradeship, if you like, to other areas of stress, like global warming and whatever you can to prevent future bushfires, future disasters, if you can change your thinking of the economy from sort of useless ideologies to what actually is important and what is useful, and how to be flexible about things. Well, all those things could be useful. For individuals, one learns about oneself in these situations, and the more you learn about yourself as a human being, the more it can be useful in the future. You might learn new skills, you might learn patience, you might learn how to be alone. There are all kinds of different things.
I remember something that you've always said to me when something big has happened, and it's that I should really be careful when I cross the road. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And well, it's good for the next generation to remember because the oldies tend to forget things as well. So, yeah, look, in times of stress, there are more accidents. Now, just because there are fewer cars on the roads now, when you are driving, you're more likely under stress to be not concentrating. You might be spurred by some emotion that suddenly comes out. You have to be extra careful, not only on the roads, but also at home with electrical devices and so on. Yeah, because all those things actually increase. And they also increase after the disaster when you're still recovering. So you've got to be extra careful. Yeah.
I just remember I have your voice in my head and I stand at the curb and I look to cross the road and then I look again and just take a breath and just make sure it's safe. Because, we really do need to look after ourselves and one another through all this. So,
Yes.
Dad, let's wrap it up with just a last word from you, just some advice for people. Perhaps someone's woken up today and they're feeling like today's a pretty hard day. What are some comforting or practical words that you could share with them?
Well, start from the basics. Take some deep breaths. Look around, orientate yourself, try to get the realistic situation in your mind. Look after yourself. Don't smoke more, or don't smoke at all would be better. Don't eat more. Be careful turning on gas or turning it off. With electrical devices and so on, be ever more careful. Try to make a timetable of what you're going to do for this day. Try to make in that timetable, put in the things that you need to do, that are important to do, that serve survival, but also things that give you pleasure. Give yourself time to relax, time to exercise, and time to relax. These are, we mentioned routines and don't get immersed in the newspapers and every possible medium about what is happening. I really mean make a timetable, which is quite interesting because I'm doing it myself, and it's working okay. It's difficult, but I think having a routine is really a good idea. And keep up healthy behaviours. Don't say, "Oh well, what does it matter now if I do this or that?" Look after kids. That's actually very important. When adults are immersed in their own problems, they tend to forget their children, who are themselves immersed in their problems in their own way, and they don't want to disturb their parents because they tend to see their parents now as more fragile, and they want to look after the parents. So communicate with your children. If they are young, allow them to draw or to play, and they might communicate their anxieties through that. Look after your neighbours. Be careful driving. Eat well. So, see the things that you would normally do. Now you have to think about. You might have had a routine of exercise. Well, now you have to actually think about it and make yourself do it. And that itself is exhausting. So if you have a routine about which you don't have to think and force yourself, it saves energy. Also, if you have a routine and you do things, at the end of the day you feel you've accomplished something useful, as against sort of being in this sort of fatigued, grey nothingness. Have patience. I think we need a lot of patience.
Oh, yeah. No, I think we definitely need patience. But I'm glad that despite your rigorous timetable, you're able to fit in a chat with Dirty Linen today. Thanks so much, Dad. It's really quite fun to interview you. We can do it again sometime. But in the meantime.
Oh, well, it's fun being interviewed by you, and actually you're a good interviewer.
Must have learnt something over all these years as a journalist. Thanks so much, Dad. Dr. Paul Valent. I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot of comfort and practical assistance from your words today.
Oh, thank you, Dani.
No worries. If anyone needs to go beyond this conversation and chat to somebody, you can contact your GP and be referred for mental health support. You can also look at Beyond Blue, which is beyondblue.org.au. And if you need someone to chat to right now, you can call Lifeline on 131114.
Oh, Dani, before you go, could I also maybe suggest that people look at my website, paulvalent.com, and go to disasters.
Definitely. paulvalent.com, and look at the disasters tab, but also everyone should check out Dad's new book. Thanks, Dad.
Okay. See you, Dani. Bye.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtyLinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.